In 1959, Rod Serling brought a landmark series called The Twilight Zone to North American audiences. While speculative fiction was no stranger in the realm of books or radio, Serling embraced a medium still fairly in its infancy to share enlightening and thought-provoking tales with thousands of people. It got almost cancelled several times, but endured to eventually include 156 episodes. Now, there are more than a few bombs in there, but for the most part, the series has endured the test of time, and its legacy and influence on countless shows and films is completely undeniable. In 1964, the show was finally canned for good, and sadly, with the Twilight Zone's end, it will be the end of Serling's prominence in television storytelling. Nah, just kidding, there's still the Night Gallery. Okay, let's back up just a bit. When CBS cancelled The Twilight Zone, the original thought was to shop it around to another network. After all, Serling was practically a household name. Other networks would almost certainly want to be the one to scoop up his storytelling prowess. Serling eventually got into talks with ABC, whose bigwig Tom Moore proposed a show called Witches, Warlocks, and Werewolves. The Twilight Zone name was owned by CBS after all, and Serling had sold his rights to it. A story for another time. Serling was less than enamored at this idea. The last thing he wanted was to be locked into a series limited by genre expectations. Serling proposed something a little more in the middle, but it fell through. I quote, "Serling told Daily Variety that Moore seems to prefer weekly ghouls, and we have what appears to be a considerable difference of opinion. I don't mind my show being supernatural, but I don't want to be hooked into a graveyard every week." End quote. Then in 1969, after numerous other projects, both big and small, that are beyond the purview of this presentation, Serling wrote a TV film called Night Gallery, a collection of 3 of his stories. It was the biggest hit in ratings that night, and Serling won an award from the Mystery Writers of America. A new series was born the following year, produced by NBC.
Good evening, and welcome to a private showing of 3 paintings, displayed here for the first time. Each is a collector's item in its own way.
This isn't the History Channel, so let's get down to the meat and potatoes here and talk about the show itself. There's a few things to know about the nature of the series, especially as it compares to its much more famous predecessor. The first thing to understand is the shift in genre. Twilight Zone was speculative fiction. It could be scary, it could be sci-fi, but ultimately his goal was to speculate about some aspect of the human condition and leave the audience something to contemplate. The Night Gallery, on the other hand, is a horror anthology. The primary goal of the series, to Serling's chagrin at times, was to scare and frighten. Sometimes this was done in a contemplative way, but lesser tales were content to just try to jump out and yell boo. We'll see both as we walk through the episodes together. The second thing you should know is where Rod Serling sits in the equation. Officially, the show is called Rod Serling's Night Gallery. Despite this, Serling had very little sway on what got aired. He was still the biggest script contributor. Make no mistake there. He wrote 35 of the 93 scripts. But he was in no way involved in the show's production. And he didn't want to be a producer, but he had hoped that his reputation and the fact that he had his name in the title would give him some de facto control. Not so much. So while Twilight Zone was undoubtedly his baby, Night Gallery is more of a distant cousin. I quote, "On Twilight Zone, I took the bows, but I also took the brickbats, and properly, because when it was bad, it was usually my fault. But when it was bad on Gallery, I had nothing to do with it, yet my face was on it all the time."
Are you at odds with the network over Night Gallery, or do you not want to talk about that?
Oh, no, not really. They say it's Rod Serling's Night Gallery, and it isn't really Rod Serling's Night Gallery. It's somebody else's. And I only write a few of the scripts, and I front the show.
It's not yours.
It doesn't remotely belong to me. I have no proprietary interest in that at all. Some of the shows are quite good and quite interesting, but it's not science fiction, and it ceases to be fantasy. It's sort of a quick run through a cemetery. And it tries to compete with shows which are more popular than it is, namely Mannix, which is very action-packed and full of violence, and I suppose of its type, of its genre, it's very well done. But that wasn't what Night Gallery was supposed to be about, Dick. It was supposed to be a much more cerebral exercise. It was supposed to be much more diversified in its approach to things. It could be all things, science fiction and fantasy and the occult and the bizarre. But unfortunately, it's been an inconsistent show. But it may do very well. I just wish they'd use somebody else other than me, that's all.
What you're talking about is loss of control, then, I suppose. Did you ever have control over the
I
form?
thought I had at one point until the phone didn't ring for several weeks.
There are two more things to note, and both have to do with the presentation of the series. First, the framing device. This is one way the show is greatly differentiated from The Twilight Zone. Though the episodes are still anthological in nature, they are now bound not only by Serling's presence, but also by the physical space they reside in. The Night Gallery is a place, and in each episode, we, the audience, are taken on a tour through the gallery to see its offerings. These are always presented as portraits.
Welcome, art lovers. We offer for your approval a still life, if you will, of noise. A soundless canvas suggestive of sound. Good evening. Of course, you're all here by invitation, but don't let it disturb you if these paintings per se don't happen to be your thing. These are rather special paintings, the kind of hangings generally put up with a noose. This painting, for example, is of a rather special world. What has become perpetuated in the language as the ghetto. That dismal realm of pushcarts and poverty, where hopes are stamped down like dirty shoes on snow. Good evening. I might offer this small admonishment if you happen to be a purist in your judgment of art. These are not your ordinary canvases. You don't find Monet in a mausoleum or a Van Gogh in a graveyard. This item here, commentative on what A.J. Liebling referred to as the sweet science, obviously having something to do with the manly art of self-defense, boxing. But if the Marquis of Queensberry mayhem doesn't particularly turn you on, don't turn this off. This painting tells a story infinitely more intriguing than a couple of fast boys mixing it up. It's called The Ring with the Red Velvet Ropes. And it tells you the tale of precisely who is the real heavyweight boxing champion of the world. And I think you'll be surprised. Surprise happens to be our stock in trade, because this is the Night Gallery.
The second thing of note is the asymmetric length of the stories. As was becoming much more common in the 1970s, Night Gallery had an hour-long time slot, 45 to 50 minutes plus commercials. However, this time was used to tell multiple stories. Usually, this took the form of two 20 to 25-minute tales, but there was lots of variance, such that in the run of the series we have tales that range from 40 minutes all the way down to 3 minutes in length or shorter. As a result, my reviews will also be of varying lengths to reflect this. In its third and final season, Night Gallery was instead given a 30-minute time slot, and with a couple of exceptions, told a single 20 to 25-minute story during its last year. We will talk about the pros and cons of the various lengths of tales as we proceed through the series. Now, on to the review format itself. If you are familiar with my other review series at this point, then you know that each review is a hybrid of audio commentary where I'll break down narrative quality, the acting, pacing, concept, and overall enjoyment factor, and clips from the episode to highlight and accentuate certain plot points and performances. And at the end of each review, I give the episode a score. Now, my scoring system is not intended to be a pure out of 10 system, but instead a categorical representation of the episode's merits and enjoyment. In other words, 2 episodes that get the same score are almost certainly not equal, but have a similar number of merits and positive traits. Because I'm the guy who wears a hat, each episode will receive a score out of 3 fedoras, thus creating 4 distinct categories. 0 out of 3 means abysmal and irredeemable. 1 out of 3 means bad or mediocre, but shows potential. 2 out of 3 means good, but lacking potential. And 3 out of 3 means excellent and praiseworthy. It's quite possible that you are very familiar with the series. It's quite possible you didn't even know it existed. Wherever you sit on the scale, my hope is that you will find this review series fun, entertaining, and educational. So, welcome, art lovers, to the Night Gallery.